My name is Eli Carter, 33 years old. I own a typewriter repair and old book restoration shop in a small town called Harlow, Oregon. The kind of place where if you sneeze in the morning, your neighbor at the end of the street will knock on your door in the afternoon to ask if you need medicine. I like Harlow for that, and sometimes I don't like Harlow for that. My life is steady in the way that outsiders would call peaceful and insiders sometimes call standing still. I wake up at 7 in the morning, open the shop at 8, fix machines, restore books, drink coffee, read, close the shop at 6 in the evening. Go home, cook a meal, simple enough not to waste time but decent enough not to call it laziness, then read some more, then sleep. I don't complain about that life, truly. It's just that I don't know what I'm waiting for. Until Jack Donovan sent a message at 10 o'clock at night. Eli, can you help me text her? Jack Donovan has been my best friend since we were 9. We grew up on the same street, threw stones into the lake together, shared a sandwich on summer afternoons when there was nothing to do. Jack was the first person I called when my mother died. He drove to my house in 20 minutes, sat beside me all night, and didn't say a word. Not because he didn't know how to speak, but because he knew that night I didn't need any words at all. Jack is good that way. Good through presence, good through action, good through specific, small, timely things, not good with words. He is a carpenter. His hands are calloused. He understands wood the way he understands people. One look, and he knows which direction the grain runs, whether to follow it or change course. But if you told him to write an email to someone he liked, he would stare at the screen for 50 minutes, then type out, "Hi, this is Jack. I want to invite you to eat. Is next week okay?" Then he would look back at that and think it was perfectly fine. That doesn't make him less capable. It's just that Jack understands that wood is visible, measurable, felt by hand, but language is not. Language is slippery, hard to grasp, tends to slip away when you need it most. I've known Jack for over 20 years. I know what he'll do when he likes someone. He'll show up, fix this, bring that, take care with every practical thing that can be cared for, quietly present. But there was one thing he didn't know, and it wasn't until he met Hannah that he realized some people need to be heard, not just seen. Hannah Mercer opened a bookshop across the street one April morning. I knew because I heard the sound of drilling starting at 7 in the morning and it didn't stop until noon. At first, I didn't pay much attention. The storefront across from my shop changed owners often. First a laundry, then a flower shop, then empty for half a year. I was used to the sounds of change from across the street. But Jack noticed. Jack wasn't usually one to notice things around him. He tended to live inside his own head, inside his work, inside the piece of wood in front of him. Yet, that day, he stopped by my shop at noon, for no particular reason, stood looking out the window and said, very softly, "She's planting trees inside the shop." I looked up. Across the street, a woman was carrying a climbing plant inside, hair tied up high, light blue shirt, movements decisive but careful. The kind of careful belonging to someone who knows what they're carrying is fragile. "Yeah," I said. "The shop's name is Willow and Pine." Jack stood there another 2 minutes. Then he left. But the next day he came back, and the day after that. The first handwritten letter was written on a Wednesday evening. Jack sat across from me at the table in the shop. Paper spread out, ink pen. He copied very carefully, letters large and neat, like a carpenter chiseling a precise groove. Slow, but right. I sat in my chair with the draft and wrote. Jack didn't tell me what he wanted to say this time. He just said, "You already know how I feel about her. Go ahead and write." And I wrote. I wrote the things I thought Jack would want to say if he knew how to say them. I wrote from what he told me, from what Hannah had replied in emails, from the understanding of her that I'd accumulated through months of reading what she wrote. I wrote, "Hannah, he's not good at beginning letters. Doesn't know where to begin when there's too much to say and language has its limits. There's something he's wanted to say for a long time. He doesn't like the way people tell each other that time heals everything, as if pain is just an illness and illness must be cured. He thinks there are things that don't get healed but only lived with. You learn to carry them, not to set them down. You seem to know this, not because you say so, but because you don't say the things people usually say to appear as if they're already fine. He doesn't know what that means, only knows that beside you, he doesn't feel he has to pretend anything at all." Jack finished copying, read it back once, then nodded. "That's right. These are the things I wanted to say." I didn't ask him whether he truly wanted to say those things. Didn't ask because I was afraid of the answer. Hannah received the letter the following morning. 3 days passed before she replied. A pale blue envelope sent to Jack's carpentry shop. Inside was her handwritten letter. Small, neat writing, no decoration, no flourishes. Jack brought it over for me to read. Didn't ask why I needed to read it. He understood that what Hannah wrote would be the material for the next letter. I needed to read it to understand where she was. I picked up the letter, and I didn't read it in the usual sense. I read each word like reading a map of a place I had never been permitted to go. She wrote about her previous marriage, Not much, just one paragraph and very measured. She didn't call her ex-husband by any judgmental term. She only wrote, "I once had a life where everything on the surface was in its proper place. But inside, there was nowhere for me to stand." One sentence. 8 years of marriage in one sentence. She wrote about the reason for opening the bookshop. She wrote about her fear, not of failure, but of starting and then having to give up midway. And at the end of the letter, she wrote, "You asked why I prefer handwritten letters. Because handwritten letters have no delete button. I once lived with someone who would erase the things he'd said and replace them with something else until I no longer knew what was real. Handwritten letters can't be erased." I like that. I put the letter down, looked out the shop window, across the street. Willow and Pine was open. The light inside was warm. Through the glass, I could see a figure arranging books on the shelves. "What's wrong?" Jack asked. "Nothing," I said. "What do we write to her this time?" I looked at the letter a moment longer. "Let me think." Jack left. I stayed with Hannah's letter in my hands. I sat for a long time. From then on, there was something I didn't tell Jack, didn't tell anyone, and tried not to admit to myself. I began to remember. Not remembering in the sense of taking notes, like jotting things on a list for later use. Remembering in the way of someone who cannot help but remember. The kind of remembering where something keeps appearing in your mind at moments you didn't call it up. Remembering that Hannah was afraid of the phone ringing after 9 o'clock at night. She mentioned it once in an early email, very briefly, in a long sentence. I wasn't sure whether Jack had noticed, but I remembered. Remembering that she didn't want to be called brave. She wrote, "People always tell me I'm brave for starting over, but I don't feel brave. I just had no better option." Remembering that she had been a teacher, that she'd left teaching after her marriage fell apart. Not because she hated the profession, but because she couldn't stand at the lectern teaching students about honesty when her own life contained too many things she couldn't be truthful about. Remembering that she liked people who let sadness exist rather than rushing to make it lighter. She wrote that in a letter in December. I read it, then sat still for a long time and didn't understand why that sentence kept circling in my head. Later I understood, because that was what I had always wanted from others and no one had ever done for me. To let sadness exist, not fix it, not explain why it was irrational, not quickly change the subject, just let it be there together with the person carrying it. I didn't know whether I was writing those letters for Hannah or for myself. I lived across from Hannah's shop for those 7 months. I looked across the street more times than I wanted to admit, saw her arrange books, saw her make coffee for customers, saw her stand at the window on overcast afternoons, eyes looking out, mind somewhere else, just as Jack had described. But Jack described it like relating an interesting detail. I looked at it and saw someone trying to rearrange something inside herself that no one could see. There were mornings she'd bring coffee out to the pavement and sit there alone before the shop opened. 2 hands holding the cup, eyes looking at nothing. No phone, no book, just sitting and looking. I didn't step out to say hello. Not because I was hesitant, but because I didn't know who I was in her story. In the letters, I was Jack's voice. I didn't exist. In real life, I was just the typewriter repairman at the shop across the street. Those 2 things could never be the same person. Never. Jack and Hannah started meeting in person in the 3rd month of the letters. Jack repaired a bookshelf for her one weekend afternoon. He brought his tools over, worked the whole afternoon, asked for no payment. Hannah made coffee for him. They sat together after the work was done and talked. Jack recounted every detail to me in the way he always did. Very concrete, very direct, with no outer layer to it. She smiles rarely, but when she does, she smiles with her whole eyes. She asked me about my family. I told her about my parents. She listened in that way of listening you know is real. "I think I really love her, Eli." He said this without any doubt. And I believed him, because Jack never says things he doesn't truly feel. He loved Hannah through presence, through specific acts, through the way he appeared at the right time without anyone having to ask. But I also thought of Hannah, sitting beside Jack at that moment, smiling with her whole eyes. I wondered in my own head who she was seeing. Was it Jack the carpenter who fixed her bookshelf, or was it the person in those letters? The one who remembered she didn't like being asked if she was okay, who understood why she liked handwritten letters, who let her silences exist. I had no answer, and I had no right to ask. Jack and Hannah's first dinner was at a small restaurant beside the lake, one Saturday evening in November. Jack called me from in front of the restaurant to ask whether he needed a tie. I told him he didn't. He called back after dinner, the happiness clear in his voice. "How was it?" I asked. "Good." She said, "I sound more natural in person." "More natural than what then in the letters?" Jack's voice hesitated slightly for a moment. She said, "In the letters, I tend to use words that are very..." She couldn't explain it. She said, "Reading the letters, she sees a part of me that's different from when we're together." I was silent. "Do you think so too?" Jack asked. "Letters and meeting in person are different, Jack." "Yeah, that's true." He moved on to telling me about the food that evening. Lemon marinated salmon. Hannah ordered white wine. They sat until nearly 10 at night. Jack didn't think further about what Hannah had said, but I did. All that night I thought about it. Hannah was building an image of Jack from two sources, the real-life person and the person in the letters. Those two sources were beginning to contradict each other, and someone as perceptive as Hannah, someone who read letters as carefully as reading a map, had certainly sensed it. She just hadn't said so yet. I became more careful with the letters after that, deliberately made them less perfect, wrote simpler sentences, left out the subtler observations, let Jack add a few things himself in his own way. But Hannah always asked about the most complex things. Last week you wrote that you think of me when you look at broken things. Would you like to explain more today? Jack read that and looked at me. Did I write that? Yeah. What did I mean? I got out the original draft, explained it to him. Jack nodded. Oh, right. That's a good way to put it. I looked at him. He didn't see the problem, but Hannah had. There was one night I sat down to write alone without waiting for Jack to tell me anything. Jack had messaged, just write however you think is right. I trust you. I sat down with white paper. No notes from Jack, no account given. Just me and what I wanted to say. And I wrote, not entirely for Jack. Not entirely. By then, the boundary had blurred to the point where I no longer knew who I was writing for. I wrote the things I wish someone would understand about me. I wrote the things I thought she would want to hear. Not because I calculated it, but because after so many months of reading what she wrote, I knew her in the way I knew few people. I wrote, there are afternoons he looks out the window and doesn't know what he's thinking about, only knows he doesn't want that moment to end. Have you ever felt that way? Not happy, not sad, just present in a way you can't explain? I wrote, he thinks of you when he's repairing something broken, not because he's comparing you to something broken, but in those moments he understands best the feeling of something not yet ready to be let go. I wrote those sentences, then sat looking back at them, and I knew I was writing about myself, not about Jack, but I still gave them to Jack to copy, because I didn't know what else to do, because telling the truth at that moment would mean admitting what I wasn't ready to admit, that in all those letters, there were parts I wrote not for Jack. I wrote for myself, and she, whom I was not permitted to love, had read all of it. There were details that began to worry me. Once Hannah brought up with Jack, over coffee together, a line from a previous letter. Jack didn't remember the line. He laughed and said he'd forgotten, then changed the subject. Seamless, without stumbling. But I thought Hannah was not deceived by that seamlessness. Another time, Hannah used the word silence, a word I'd used in a letter, then said to Jack, you write about silence a lot. I like that. Jack didn't know he'd written about silence. He nodded as if he knew, then came home and asked me which letter that word had been in. There were times Hannah asked Jack about a detail in a letter and he had to deflect to another topic because he truly couldn't remember what he'd written. Jack wasn't worried. He thought it was normal. People don't remember everything they've ever said. But I was worried because Hannah remembered everything. Every sentence. Every word, like someone who had read those letters many times, folding and unfolding them, committing them to some place in her mind that nothing could erase. Someone like that, when she heard Jack say something that contradicted the letters, wouldn't let it pass. She would notice and accumulate. I didn't know how much Hannah had accumulated then, only knew that every mismatch was a small piece of the picture she was assembling in her mind. And then one morning, I've forgotten which day, only remember the sky was overcast and the shop was quiet. I forgot to put the draft into the drawer. It was the passage of the letter I was sketching, my slanted handwriting, incomplete sentences. In the upper left corner, I would write in red pen the words I was considering. Hannah stopped by the shop to pick up a book I'd helped her find from an old bookshop in Portland. I stood up and got the book from the back shelf. 30 seconds. When I turned back, she was standing on the other side of the counter, eyes looking down at the table surface. I wasn't sure whether she'd read it. Didn't ask. She didn't mention it. But when she looked up at me, her expression held something I couldn't read right then. Now I can read it. That was the expression of someone who had just confirmed what they had long suspected. Not shocked, not angry, just a strange stillness of someone who had just set down something they had been carrying too long. She took the book, said thank you, left all key, as if nothing had happened. But from then on, her letters changed. Not by much, just enough for someone reading carefully to notice. She began writing sentences without a clear address. Not Dear Jack, just Dear. She wrote once, have you ever felt like you're talking to one person but actually talking to someone else? I read that sentence and put the letter down. Read it again. Then once more. She knew. I didn't know since when, didn't know how much, but she knew. And she didn't say anything. That, in a strange way, hurt more than if she had spoken directly. Jack proposed to Hannah in March. He didn't ask me to write the proposal. This was the first time since everything began that he spoke himself, chose his own words, stood before her, and asked in his own voice. I didn't know what he said. He didn't share the details. I only knew that Hannah said yes. Jack called me right after. She agreed, Eli. I thought I should be happy. I tried to be happy. That's great, Jack. You're the first person I called. I know. He hung up. And I sat in the shop alone, surrounded by old typewriters and books needing restoration. Yellow light, the smell of paper and machine oil, familiar and ordinary in the way everything in this shop is familiar to me. But in my chest right then was nothing ordinary. I didn't name that thing. Naming something sometimes makes it real in a way you can't control. I just sat with it, let it be there, in exactly the way I had written in the letters that people should let sadness exist. I let that nameless thing exist for a few hours. Then I stood up and began repairing the typewriter waiting on the table. Hands working, mind not entirely there. Those months of wedding preparation passed under a pressure no one spoke aloud. Jack began to worry. He worried in the way that only someone who'd known him for years would recognize. Quieter than usual, tending to sit staring at a fixed point, calling me at strange hours not to tell stories, but just to hear someone pick up. One evening, we sat on the steps of his house. Cold beer, late night, the sound of crickets from the fence. Do you think she really loves me? He asked. I think she loves you, I said. Loves me in real life or loves me in the letters? Silence. This was the first time Jack had spoken directly to the thing both of us had silently known for months. I don't know if I can still tell the difference between those two things, he went on. She often brings up sentences from the letters. And you know, I don't remember them all. And she looks at me with this look like she's searching for something she's not sure I have. I didn't reply. Eli, do you feel like you've done something wrong? I thought about that question longer than needed. Yes, I said. Me too. We sat a while longer in silence. The beer, the crickets. Should we tell her? Jack asked. I knew the answer, but I also knew that whatever the answer was, it would change many things that couldn't be undone. That's your decision, I said. This is between you and her. Jack nodded, looked down at the can of beer in his hands. But it's also your business, Eli. I didn't deny that, because it was true. From beginning to end, it was also my business, even though I tried to stand in the background and pretend I was only the translator. The night before the wedding, Jack called at 11 o'clock. I can't not say it. His voice wasn't panicked, wasn't impulsive. It was the voice of someone who had thought until there was no other way. I can't marry her without her knowing the truth, even if it's worse for not doing so. I sat in the shop, yellow light, alone. My own typewriter sat on the table, the one I usually use to test ink after putting in a new ribbon. I looked at it and thought I wasn't sure when this small shop had become the place I tended to sit alone late at night. Are you sure? I asked. Sure. Then we'll tell her. You'll be there too. I looked at the typewriter one more second. Yes, I'll be there. We went to Hannah's bookshop the next morning, a few hours before the wedding. The shop was closed that day, but the light inside was on. Hannah was in there, probably rearranging a few things, doing something to avoid sitting still. Jack knocked. She opened the door, looked at him, looked at me, not surprised, not the look of someone unprepared. She stood there like someone who had known someone was coming today. Jack began to speak. Without beautiful sentences, without preamble, just Jack, direct and real as he always was. Hannah, I have to tell you something. The letters, I didn't write them myself. Eli wrote them. I told him my feelings. Eli wrote them out. I wasn't trying to deceive you. I just didn't know how to say the things that mattered. But everything I felt towards you was real. Only the words weren't mine. He finished and stood still. Hannah looked at him, then looked at me, then said very softly, I know. Jack went still. For about a second longer than any ordinary second. Since when he asked, Hannah didn't answer right away. She walked deeper into the shop, to the small wooden table in the corner, where she usually sat on mornings before the shop opened. The table I knew, because I had often looked across from my own shop window. She sat down, didn't invite us to sit, not because she was cold, because she needed to sit alone in that moment. Since about the 4th month, she said, when Jack didn't remember the story about the tree from the letter, and when he used the word moved while the letter had used stirred, 2 similar words, but not the same. Jack looked down at the floor. And once I came by Eli's shop, Hannah continued, to pick up a book. He went to the back to get it. I looked down at the table. There was a draft. The writing style. She paused. I recognized it immediately. She looked at me. I didn't need to read all of it. Just one sentence was enough. The room was silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence. The kind where each person is sitting with something of their own and doesn't know where to begin. Were you angry? Jack asked. Hannah thought genuinely. I could see her thinking, not thinking to find the right thing to say, but thinking to find the true thing to say. I don't know. Was I angry? Yes, but not at Jack. She looked at him. You never had any bad intentions toward me. Jack nodded. And at me, I heard myself ask. Hannah looked at me, slowly. That expression? I will not forget it. Not anger, not blame, just sadness. The sadness of someone who had just realized something they didn't know they were losing. With Eli, she said, choosing each word carefully, I don't know what I should feel. Because those letters, whoever wrote them, they helped me through a very difficult time. They gave me reason to believe I could still be heard. And that doesn't disappear just because I now know who wrote them. She paused, but that's also why everything became complicated. Hannah stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street. Outside that morning, there was nothing particular. The town street, the neighbor's house, a dog walking past on the pavement. But she stood looking out as if she were looking at something only she could see. I can't go through with the wedding today, she said. Jack didn't object. He just closed his eyes for a second. Just 1 second. I understand you, she said, her voice steady, not trembling. You love me through everything you do. Through the bookshelf you repaired. Through the times you showed up when you were needed. Through the way you never asked me to explain everything. I felt all of that. She turned to look Jack directly in the face. But I can't stop searching in you for the things I read in those letters, and that isn't fair to you. Jack nodded, very slowly, very slightly. You're right, he said. No one cried. There was no dramatic scene. Two people stood not far apart, speaking in ordinary voices, and that was more painful than any crying. Because when there's nothing left to be dramatic about, that's when everything has truly been decided. Hannah looked at me. I was standing in the corner of the room, near the entrance, the furthest point from which I could still be considered in the room. Eli, she said. I looked up. I'm not angry at you. I said nothing. But I don't know what to thank you for either. Because what you did, however good it was, gave me a love for a person who didn't fully exist. That sentence struck somewhere I had no name for. Half was Jack, she said. Half was you. And those two halves don't come together into one real person. I nodded. So I don't know who I loved? Her voice held no resentment, just truth. I can't begin a marriage when I myself don't know where my heart stands. I wanted to say something. There were so many things I wanted to say at that moment. Things I had held inside for over a year, but every sentence I could think of sounded either too late or in the wrong place or belonging to a different conversation than this one. I said nothing. And perhaps that was the first time I was truly silent. Not because I didn't know how to speak, but because there are things that don't need to be said in beautiful sentences. Jack left town a few days later, not leaving for good. He just needed space. Went to his brother's place in Portland, worked there for a few weeks. We didn't talk much during that time, just a few short messages, always at strange hours. Early morning or late night, as if he only messaged when there was nothing else left to do. Jack messaged, I'm okay. I messaged, I know. Jack messaged, how about you? I looked at that question for a while. I'm thinking. Jack didn't ask anymore. That was the thing I valued most about him. He knew when to leave things be. Hannah closed the shop for a week, without notice beforehand. Just a handwritten, temporarily closed sign hanging on the glass. Her handwriting neat as always. I looked across the street each morning and saw the shop dark. I didn't know where she'd gone, didn't ask, had no right to ask. But during those days, I kept thinking of her letters. The reply letters that I had read far more times than Jack ever had. I remembered every passage as if memorizing a piece of music I used to listen to alone. She had once written about the sound of a phone ringing after 9 at night. A line she wrote very briefly in an email, as if only mentioning it in passing. But I read it and knew it wasn't something she mentioned in passing. She wrote, I've never told anyone why I'm afraid of that sound. It's tied to one specific night. The night she called me to say the marriage was over, just the paperwork left. 8 years ended by a phone call. Since then, I haven't been able to answer the phone after 9 at night anymore. 8 years in one sentence. I read that line for the first time and thought who she was really telling this to. Not Jack. Jack didn't know the difference between 8 years and 8 months. Jack cared, but he cared through presence, not through understanding. She was telling it to the person listening on the other side of the page. That person was me, but I had never been permitted to be myself. I kept working in the shop during those days, hands fixing the machines, eyes looking at small mechanisms, but my mind not entirely there. There was a typewriter on the workbench then that I hadn't repaired for 2 weeks. Not because it was difficult, but because every time I looked at it, I thought of a sentence I'd written in the November letter. A sentence I wrote not for Jack, but for myself. There are things that break and can still be repaired, but can never return to how they were at first. When I wrote that sentence, I didn't know I was writing about myself. Now I know. And I'm also not sure I want to return to being whole in whatever sense that might mean anymore. Because being whole means before the letters. And before the letters, I was living a steady life not knowing what I was waiting for. I know now what I was waiting for. It's just that it came in a way I was not permitted to keep. The envelope arrived one Thursday morning, about 3 weeks later. I opened the shop at 8 o'clock and found it lying on the wooden floor, right by the door crack. White envelope, no name of sender, no stamp. Someone had placed it through the door slot directly. Inside was a letter, but not a new letter. It was the very first letter I had ever written to Hannah. Through Jack's hand, I recognized it immediately because I remembered every word. The paper was older than when it was first sent. the fold lines following the old creases, like a letter that had been opened and folded again many times. She had kept this letter, and folded and opened it many times. I turned it over to the back. There was more writing in her hand, small, careful letters, characteristic of her. She wrote, "I don't know whether being understood through borrowed words counts as love, but I know this. Those letters helped me believe I could still be heard." And that is not a small thing. I read that 3 times. Didn't immediately stand up, didn't immediately do anything. Just sat at the counter in the morning just after opening the shop and let that question stay in my mind as long as it deserved to stay. Being understood through borrowed words, does that count as love? I had no answer. I think no one has a truly clear answer to that question. The line between real feeling and the language that expresses it is a line so blurred that people often confuse the two, mistakenly thinking that words create feelings or mistakenly thinking feelings are enough on their own without words. I knew one thing. What I felt while writing those letters was real, even though I never gave it a name. The day she returned to the shop, it was lightly raining. Not heavy rain, the kind that Oregonians call mist, so thin you don't see individual drops, just the wet road and air thicker than usual. I was sitting at the counter, reading. The doorbell chimed. I looked up. Hannah Mercer walked into my shop. She wore a beige coat, her hair slightly damp at the fringe. In her hands was an old typewriter, small, the shade of green that had faded to a dull blue-green from the style of the 1960s. I had never seen that typewriter before. She walked up to the counter, set the typewriter down, looked at me, then said, "People say this is the only place in town that still knows how to repair old things." I looked at the typewriter. The carriage was misaligned, several keys jammed, the ribbon had likely dried up long ago, but the main mechanism, I could see at once, was still intact. It just needed someone who knew how to look inside and wasn't in a hurry to conclude. This typewriter could still be saved. I looked up at her. She was still standing there, not smiling, not smiling, just standing there looking at me, as if waiting to see what I would say. I thought of many things in those few seconds. Thought of the letters, thought of Jack, thought of the question on the back of the old letter, thought of everything that had happened and everything that could not be undone. Thought of a sentence I had once written in a December letter, not for Jack, not entirely. He thinks of you when he's repairing something broken, not because he's comparing you to something broken, but in those moments, he understands best the feeling of something not yet ready to be let go. I put the book down, stood up, looked at the typewriter for 1 more second. 1 second to examine, 1 second to confirm what I had seen from the first moment. Then I said, "Let me take a look." That was all I said. She nodded. And I knew we both understood that sentence was not only about the typewriter. Let me take a look. Not, I'll be able to fix it. Not everything is fine now. Not any sentence that sounds better but is less true. Just let me take a look. Because honestly, I didn't know what could be repaired and what couldn't. I didn't know where Hannah and I would start or whether we would start at all. I didn't know what Jack and I would recover from 20 years of friendship after everything that had happened. I didn't know the answer to the question she had written on the back of the old letter. But I knew one thing. This time, if there was anything at all to be said, any sentence, any letter, any truth, it would be mine. Not borrowed, not standing in, not spoken from behind someone else's name. This time, if I had anything to say to Hannah Mercer, I would be the one saying it.